All right, well, it looks like we have quite a few people on, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Um, my name is Susan Parker. I'm with Healthy Living Matters, and I'm happy to introduce Dr. Sarah Schweitzer to present to us today on her research results on nutrition and physical activity trainings for in-home childcare providers in Harris County. Dr. Sarah Schweitzer is a registered dietitian and a lecturer at the University of Texas at Austin. Her research focuses on the development of nutrition interventions for parents and caregivers of young children. One of her most recent projects is called Lunch is in the Bag, and it's a behaviorally based intervention developed for child care center setting, which guides parents to pack healthy lunches for preschool-aged children. So Dr. Schweitzer has lent her expertise in early childhood nutrition to our Healthy Living Matters project by leading a series of presentations and cooking demonstrations for in-home childcare providers from across Harris County. And so Dr. Schweitzer is going to go over a little bit about what Healthy Living Matters is and the research results that she found with working with this group of in-home providers. And so I think she's going to speak for around 45 minutes, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll have some time for all attendees to ask any questions that they may have.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you could join us. This is an interesting project that we did. It was a series of focus groups and then presentations that resulted from data collected from the focus groups. So let's get started. We're going to cover a little bit of background, go through the methods, focus groups, and in-home provider presentations. Focus groups would cover some demographics, the results, and themes that came out of that. And then I'll briefly go over what I did in the presentation, and then final thoughts and questions. Healthy Living Matters is an initiative that designed or developed and set up in Harris County down around Houston area in order to help curb childhood obesity through policy change. Policies are in place that guide nutrition and physical activity for providers, but currently there are no best practices for in-home providers for training in nutrition and physical activity. So that was an area that the organization chose to take a look at, and that's sort of where I came into it. Health Living Matters, they connected with University of Texas, and we were trying to assess in-home provider needs for training. And the population that we worked with were already currently involved with the Children's Learning Institute and other research activities. So we had a ready population of both English-speaking in-home caregivers as well as Spanish-speaking in-home caregivers. So if you take a look at a snapshot of childcare today, there are 10 points, and if several of you are working with this area, you are probably very familiar with a lot of these figures, but just to bring everybody on the same page, 10.9 million children under 5 years of age are in some type of child care while their mothers work. And if we take a look at the breakdown, we look at 6% are family child care homes. So that really is a relatively small percent. However, I think the family in-home or family child care home, and there are a variety of different phrases that are used, and I hope we gradually work towards getting a consistent phrase to be using. But in the family child care homes, you've got a chance, I think, to, in small groups and more one-on-one attention, I think you have the opportunity to do more change. If we look at child care programs in both the United States and Texas, the number of centers in the United States are 117,000, in Texas 9,528. But family child care homes, 209,000 around the United States, 14,072 in Texas. And in Harris County, there are approximately 1,800 registered and licensed family child care homes. So this offers an opportunity to increase access to healthy foods and physical activity for a large number of children. If we do a little bit of work or look at a little bit of data on child care workers, there are currently 2.2 million individuals that earn a living with caring for children under the age of 5. 1.1 million are center-based care workers, whereas 250,000 are family child care home workers. Average earnings would be $21,320 for these child care workers, and 97% of child caregivers are women. 20% of the center teachers have only a high school diploma or less. 32 states currently require a high school diploma or less for lead teachers. Texas is one of them. 44% of family child care providers have a high school diploma or less, and 41 states require a high school diploma or less for regulated family child care centers. And again, Texas is one of them. I pulled a little bit of recent research just when as I was looking at this population, and there was a study that compared the obesity-related training practices and perceptions of home child care providers and center care providers that found for training, home care providers were more likely to have obesity prevention training, 57% compared to just 30.2%. Home care providers had received more nutrition training than center care providers, 82% compared to 58.6%. And home care providers had received more physical activity training, 66.7% compared to 43%. And this table shows that the type of training that the center or the family home child care home provided either to the child or to the parent, and you can see that the home family child care providers provided significantly more nutrition and physical activity training for the child, and physical activity training and then obesity prevention training for the parent, but not nutrition education or nutrition training for the parent. And then all providers responded that the home environment had more influence compared to the care environment for health behaviors and weight status, but the in-home care providers scored the influence of their care environment, scored the influence that their care environment exerted higher amounts compared to the center care providers. And I would say that, based on the focus groups that I did and the presentations, I would say I would agree with that finding. So let's take a look at focus groups for the in-home child care providers. We ran 4 focus groups, 2 for English-speaking in-home care providers and 2 for Spanish-speaking in-home care providers. The focus groups were conducted with a modified nominal group technique to ensure participation of everyone. Each focus group lasted for 2 hours and had 5 multi-part questions. So in a modified nominal group technique, the participants write down their responses to each question part individually, like 5A, then 5B, or 1A, 1B, 1C, handle each one individually. And before we moved on to the next question, each person had to provide or state their responses that they wrote down. As a leader, I or Maria, who ran the Spanish-speaking focus groups, we wrote all the responses on a big sheet, and when it was appropriate, not all the questions were appropriate for this method, but we arrived at consensus from the answers. So if there was going to be some debate, I had to, for example, looking at one of the questions is they were able to suggest topics that were going to be helpful for them in the presentation. And obviously, in a presentation, I can't cover everything, and so my point to them was, okay, from this whole laundry list that we had up on the big sheet, you have to arrive at consensus that what are the most important top 2 or 3, and you all have to agree before we move on to the next question. So it generates some good discussion, and they have to all agree before they move on. If we look at the demographics for the characteristics of these in-home care providers, and this is with all 30, we had 17 English and 13 Spanish speakers, and I grouped everybody together for our total of 30. This is interesting that the mean number of children in care was 11.27, so they ranged, most of them, between 10 and 12 children under their care in their home, and that does feed into the licensing restrictions for Texas, that they are allowed to have up to 12. And I forgot, I just didn't realize that the numbers were going to be this high, and I did not ask this consistent question of how many aides or assistants do you have to help you. So I don't know that number. The average number in the household of these caregivers were 3.8, and the average age was The mean age was 48 years, and the BMI was at 29.52. Education, again, everybody, they do want a minimum of high school or equivalent, and so everybody was at least a high school or equivalent. And then if you look at this, I have over 50% had some college or university, and then 20% had completed college. I actually had 2 that had graduate or professional degrees. The household income ranged from less than $20,000 to $80,000 to $100,000, but the majority, 33%, were $20,000 to $40,000, and then 50% were that range between $40,000 and $80,000. For ethnicity, 14 of them were Black African American, and 15 were Hispanic or Latino. Only 1 white individual was there. Now, if we move on to the responses for the focus group questions. So question A asked, do you perceive overweight and obesity as an issue for children now or in the future, or both? And for the English-speaking group, I separated this out because I saw some real differences between the English-speaking providers and the Spanish-speaking providers. And then let me tell you right off the bat that we struggled with the Spanish-speaking group. They tended to do a lot of debating among themselves. They didn't really want to write down their responses. So that you can see discrepancies between the two, and that's part of the issue is they refused to write down their responses. Got very few written responses, and that was, you sort of rely on that in a modified nominal group technique to make sure that you collect everything and get that rich data. So if we see here their perception, so the English-speaking providers tended to see it both now and in the future, whereas the Spanish-speaking providers, they were really divided among how they viewed this. And then we asked, do you think parents perceive overweight obesity to be an issue for children now, in the future, or both? And both the English and the Spanish I thought was interesting. They didn't think that the parents perceive it right now. But then just now, but we did have a group that saw, they think the parents perceive it as an issue both now and in the future. But then we have almost the same amount that I got this response. They'd sit there and they had a real issue with this question, and they'd say, well, some of my parents do, and some of my parents, I don't think they're even aware of it. And we got that from both groups. I found that to be very interesting. Question 1C is we asked them what physical and nutrition activity topics, or excuse me, nutrition and physical activity topics would be most helpful to be covered, they felt they needed to learn more about. And this does look a little bit like a laundry list, but I think if we look at the top group, we are looking at the variety of nutrition, and they still kept talking about the food groups. I had to introduce them to MyPlate. They really had not heard about MyPlate. A few of them, I guess, had. But they really all focused on exciting ways to get kids to eat in a healthy manner, and they wanted recipes that were quick and easy. And if you see the asterisks that you see along this list, that's when the English-speaking group, I did ask them to arrive at consensus. The Spanish-speaking group really pushed back against that. They didn't really want to have to arrive at consensus, so we don't have that data from the Spanish group. So, and you could tell that the group really wanted to, even my groups, they wanted everything to be listed on there, and I kept telling them that I'm going to have a finite amount of time, but I really wanted to know what they felt was most important. And then I thought this was also interesting. When you look at nutrition education, they did want information on how to speak to children about nutrition and nutrition topics. They did talk about gardening quite a bit. 2 or 3 of them had gardening. They tried to do with the children. It varied on size. And they wanted several of them comment on hands-on prep with the children, and they recognized that doing hands-on prep in the kitchen was an important thing to do. A lot of them wanted ideas for outside and rainy day activities. I got that question repeatedly throughout the focus groups. And the English speakers didn't even bring up asking for ways to communicate with parents, and yet the Spanish group did ask for that. And then we asked how the in-home providers wanted to receive the training. I found this interesting as well. All 17 of the English-speaking providers wanted in-person training, whereas none of the Spanish-speaking wanted that. But we got 13 requests for online and 13 requests for written. They were allowed to request more than one way for the Spanish-speaking. Then we went on and asked, what are you currently implementing that you consider healthy for children to eat in your care? And again, it looks a little bit like a laundry list, but I was interested to see that we had a variety of different nutrition topics that were listed, and the big one was 12 for English-speaking, 3 for Spanish-speaking for the fruit and vegetables. They all knew that that was a main focus, that was important. Then you see a variety of other answers. And then we see, I apologize, this is off by one line, but they wanted to know, what they felt they did is they felt that they taught or talked about healthy eating and food groups. They mentioned doing that at mealtime, that they let the children pour their own milk and water, they have them help cook foods, and they do homemade foods, and they let the children pick out their foods. And then nutrition education, one of them mentioned that they try and tell the parent not to give sugar. And then I really do apologize for this one, but I didn't know how to organize this. But I think we can spend just a few minutes just looking at what's listed here. So we asked, what are you currently implementing that you consider as being physically active for children in your care? And they just really wanted to share all the different things that they were doing. And you can see there's this wide variety of items that they do. Organized games, the hide and seek versus and tag type games, throwing the ball out inside. They talked about doing that on a rainy day. Have push cars where the children actually, several of them had, they talked about having paved areas where they could actually do things like the push cars. They used bubbles, building blocks. Dancing was a very common one. Equipment games, and some of them talked about having the big parachute, and they do the parachute with the group. And then you could tell they really enjoyed sharing with each other and getting ideas for them to take back. And one of the big ones that someone had suggested is painting the fence. They let the kids color the fence with chalk, and then they paint it with water to wipe it off, and then it's ready to go again. And I think people were fascinated with that one. And then I had one lady who is a trained martial arts instructor, and she said she does martial arts with the kids. So we had a wide variety of sharing of ideas at that point. Then we went on to question 3 and tried to address what barriers do you see for providing outdoor active play. And this did take place, the focus group did take place in Texas, and so the heat, sun, the weather was a big barrier, and then bugs and insects were the other key ones. And then they identified a few other random ones, and irregular drop-off time. And the interesting thing, we'll find this comes into play a little more with the themes for the focus groups, but the irregular drop-off time and the improper clothing and kids just not being used to being outdoors, they would ascribe that to the parents, that the parents would not be consistent about dropping them off, so it was very hard for them to maintain the schedule to go outside, and they would repeatedly, one of them talked about repeatedly asking the parent, don't send them in flip-flops because we do go outside, and invariably the parent would have this child show up either in flip-flops or no shoes at all. And I think there was a real frustration. My impression at this point was that I think parents may be a little more, feel more relaxed about adhering to rules and regulations when they do in-home care compared to center care, because the majority of my work has been in child care centers, and they're adhering to rules and regulations for the center are very, very important. So as we move on to question 3B, what barriers did you see to providing, or do you see to providing a variety of nutritious food? Money was a big one, but the interesting thing was that wasn't the one they chose to arrive at consensus about. Through the discussion, they wanted to emphasize potential plate waste and the food allergies and sensitivities, and this sort of goes along with plate waste, the kids not wanting to eat or picky eaters, and then parents not cooperating. They talked about trying to introduce new things, and this was interesting because you had some discussion about trying to introduce new things and sort of working against the parents, but then saying that they were able to essentially teach the child that this is what was eaten here at the child care environment, and they would get the children to eat it there, and the parents would still say that, oh no, they still won't eat that food at home, but the providers report success with the children eating those foods in there when they served it to them. Question 4A, how important is your influence on the health of children in your care? English-speaking providers almost all immediately said very important, and they identified that they were with them for such a long period of time during the day. And again, my impression is that there's a little more flexibility. People feel like they can drop their children off very early, and if they're running late, they know, and that the providers would talk about this. They would sometimes have these kids eat dinner with them, their family, if they knew the parent wasn't going to be, got held up and wouldn't be able to pick them up in time. They acknowledge that parents are on the go, and the in-home care teaches children to slow down. I thought that was very interesting. They felt that they offered the child a calming environment. Their role, they identified their role to teach healthy eating and proper discipline. And they really identified, and we'll talk about this a little more when we get to the themes, they talked about being a role model, and they thought that was very, very important. And they felt it was easier for the provider if the children were healthy and positive. That was one just was adamant about that she said, I talk about that with my parents. If the children are healthy, then everybody's healthy, and we have a very good day. And they thought it was important to nurture healthy lifestyles. And where you see over in the Spanish group, some similarities, but then it was the Spanish group identified that the parent is paying for the service, so it is important for them to have this influence of health and not blood connection, and I couldn't get an understanding of what that meant, so I won't be able to answer that question. I'm sure you've got one. If we look at 4B, how do you view your influence compared to the influence of the parent? And here we have strong responses for the English-speaking group. They do more than the parents can do. The parents depend on them. They thought that they viewed themselves as a team, and communication was important, that it was a two-way street, and they identified, or they talked about the fact that parents frequently would ask them for advice on child rearing. These are some of the older women that they clearly talked about, and very often they have their own grandchildren in their care, so they're seasoned parents as well as child care providers. If we look at question 4C, it was how do you think the parents of children in your care view your role in providing healthy eating and physical activity? Again, you see that with the English-speaking group, we've got 12 that responded parents value, and then we have comments like parents trust, parents should take the lead, but at the same time they viewed the child care provider as a leader and that they listened to the advice and the comments the child care provider would provide. But they did complain that parents don't continue practices while at home. And then this was very interesting. The Spanish-speaking, I only got these responses with the Spanish-speaking group, that parents were very demanding and don't ask about our day, and some value and some treat like maids. I thought those were very interesting comments that we got from that group. If we looked at question 5A, as a child care provider, what do you think is feasible to do in order to provide nutritious foods for the children in your care? When I asked this question, I felt that the child care providers looked at me kind of flummoxed, and they didn't really understand what they were doing. And I think what I have here is a list of things that they are currently doing and that they're just going to maintain. I don't think they identified anything new and different. So I think they struggled with this question. But when I have them prioritized, you can see planning menus, shopping, preparing healthy meals, offering healthy foods, offering fruits and vegetables, trying new foods, and role modeling as the main ideas. And then when we ask that same question about what's feasible for providing daily outdoors time for physical activity, it was essentially what they're currently doing to maintain it. They keep taking them out and exercising each day, and they did know that was very, very important. And they really talked about, one listed it here on a written response, but they all agreed and all came to consensus that 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the afternoon was something that they all consistently did. And then playing with them, they all agreed, and we'll see that with the themes, that they realized that the children wanted them to play with them, and they very often will do that. So let's take a look at the themes for the focus group responses. And first, we're going to go through 3 themes that were common among the English and Spanish-speaking in-home care providers. So the first one was the caregivers realized the need to communicate with the parent that by giving children healthy foods as babies and continuing to provide them at home, they are more likely to enjoy those foods and choose them. Comments that demonstrated this, that if you begin giving your children cauliflower or any vegetable from a very young age, they will be used to it as they get older. I think the most important thing here is education of the parents. Parents do not see the importance in the future if their child is obese or overweight. Parents don't introduce, and you try to, and it's hard for you to introduce a healthy food. The parents don't give it to them. You've got parents who are going to work with you, then you've got parents who will work with you but just don't know, and then you have parents who just don't care. The person who made that comment, everybody just looked and nodded and said yes. My influence is just as important as parents, so that we're a team to provide quality care for the children. The second theme was overall they are dedicated to creating healthy lifestyles by increasing fruits and vegetables and exercise time, and by decreasing unhealthy foods and feel they have good practices. So in nutrition, some of the comments that we talk about the different food categories when we are eating lunch. The more kids work in the kitchen, the more likely they are to eat what is served, and I love that one. We're growing fruits and veggies in our little backyard garden. Physical activity, we line them up according to their size. We do morning exercises that I call getting the sleepies out. We had a couple of those that were adamant about doing that, and we had several other caregivers that said, oh, that's a great idea, and I thought it was a wonderful idea. We have outdoor play twice a day, and I say a fun component of physical activity. Or fun is a component, I'm sorry. Theme 3, while confident in their general knowledge of nutrition and committed to the importance of healthy diet and exercise behaviors, they desire new ideas and fun activities to incorporate in their current program. So they would make repeated comments about making physical activity fun. And then how do you substitute healthy snacks instead of serving prepackaged snacks? We need like sport game ideas or obstacle course type ideas. We're growing fruits and vegetables in our little backyard garden, but I'm so limited to the knowledge of how to do. What are some alternative and tasty ways to prepare meat for main meals other than frying, because you can steam, grill, and bake? So they were aware of good nutrition practices, but they really did want some ideas and exciting ways to eat healthy. And then if we look at a couple themes that were just from the English-speaking in-home care providers, the first one is they realize that they are role models for their children and must implement healthy choices into their lives because they understand that by showing children why they should do things along with encouragement, they are more likely to learn and change their habits. So practice what you teach. Do it with them. Do it yourself. You eat healthy foods in front of the children, and that will make them want to eat healthy. Whatever we serve the children, we eat with them. Yes, I have to do it with them. That was for physical activity. We don't eat junk food in front of the children. We play a major role in their life. We are role models. We prepare food together and bring food to the table. The second theme for the English-speaking providers were that there are numerous physical and psychosocial barriers to providing healthy lifestyles and adequate physical activity and changing children's behaviors. You tell a parent to not send them there in flip-flops, and they do it anyways. I said weather, too hot, too cold, and also mosquitoes. Kids have never heard of different activities that you do outside. When my children are not used to eating healthy, it makes it hard to introduce proper foods. They are more fast food oriented. They are used to fast food. Irregular drop-off times will throw us off schedule. And cost of healthy foods are higher. And we have a couple themes that we pulled out of the Spanish-speaking in-home care providers. The child care providers need to know how to access, choose, and prepare foods using quick recipes that consist of healthy items. They are also concerned with implementing sanitary practices into their kitchens during food prep. You have to know what's better nutrition-wise. Hygiene is very important in everything while working, and after you have done, you have to sanitize every area and everything. What quantities and what portions are needed for each food group. When the food pyramid is used, obesity and everything is controlled. What quantities and what portions are needed for each food group. And within those groups, what is it that I need to know what contributes to good eating habits of the children. And the second theme is that the Spanish-speaking providers were very concerned with following the rules. That theme came up repeatedly. The program provides guidelines, but the provider has to have the responsibility. The education of the people in charge to take the information out there, because the one who dictates the hierarchy of foods is the provider, us, but if we're not trained, how do we take that information? We are governed by what the license says, that twice a day we have to take the children outside. And to every child you give the portions. We measure their portions, and that's what we are supposed to give them, like according to age, and if the child requires more, then we can give them more. So based on that, the feedback I got from the focus groups, I put together an in-home child care provider nutrition and physical activity presentation. This lasted 4 hours, and I purposely did it over lunch so that we did food preparation, you see that in the picture above, with the providers. And my focus for choosing those recipes, I've selected very specifically. First of all, I took them from primarily team nutrition materials that I realized the child care providers really were not aware of. And those are recipes that are, when they're, I'm sure some of you are familiar with them, that when you look at them, they're all portioned out. They talk very specifically about amounts and number of portions that they will make. And the prep is usually very simple, and they're really, a lot of them are very nice recipes to work with. So the takeaways in general from the focus groups, they wanted confirmation of child nutrition needs and child and physical activity needs, nutrition and physical activity. They wanted ideas, recipe ideas, nutrition education ideas, physical activity ideas. They wanted food preparation guidance, menu and recipe planning, portions, and food safety. I was very, very surprised that a lot of the English-speaking providers did not use menu cycles. And menu cycles and a little bit of recipe planning are easy ways to control costs and control amounts and just make it easier for the provider to be on a regular schedule and the resources. So in the presentation schedule, first I had an icebreaker where we did hands-on prep of 3 snack items, 3 entrees, and 2 vegetable dishes. Again, primarily from the team nutrition recipes, where I had them do the pre-prep. And they were all recipes that children ages probably 2.5 to 4.5, 5 years could easily help do different stages, different steps. And I made that point as they put these together before we started the actual program. And then during the lecture portion, as you see a photo down there, we were in a little meeting room, that we covered child nutrition and physical activity needs. I really focused on the different age brackets and how things changed, their calorie needs changed. And I really helped them see, I know they were a little confused when you talk about, well, what really is sedentary activity? What is moderate activity? What is vigorous activity? And the materials that I gave them and I talked about, I really tried to give them really concrete examples of what is considered a moderate activity versus a vigorous activity and how much time children should be spending in those activities. And then when we look at that, if you've got a child that tends to be a little more sedentary than the rest, showing that the calorie level the energy needs are different for those children, whereas if you have the children that are very, very active, always on the go, constantly active, you see that they might need as much as 100 or 200 calories more, depending on the age and sex of that child. We talked about portions. We talked a lot about meal and snack ideas. I gave some, and I was really talking about guidance with managing the fat content and the sodium content, but they also shared among themselves. And then I spent some time talking about creating a good nutrition environment. And this is something that I've done a lot with in the center, but can be very appropriate, even maybe more appropriate in a family home center or environment, that you talking about what, the conversation you have over lunch about letting them serve themselves, talking about the nutrition topic or nutrition foods that are in front of them, the healthy foods, the food groups, doing that identification, not rushing them, having it be a very pleasant environment. And then we did a hands-on activity of actually doing menu cycle planning. And what I did is what I provided for them is I had many different copies, and you can see them working with them there. I had printed out the copies of the different recipes from Teen Nutrition and other sources. I really went and got all the different sources that are there, put out by the federal government, that are free to them. They can access them. I had them physically there to work with, so they actually got to see them, and of course I gave them the website so they can go get those. And they had to plan out a week's worth of menu cycle. And then I had them physically go check it to make sure that it adhered to the CACFP guidelines, even though not all of them participate in CACFP. And then for lunch, I had an assistant or two assistants that actually prepared or cooked the foods that needed to be cooked, of the foods that they pre-prepped during the icebreaker, and those are the foods they actually ate for lunch. So they got to taste what they had made and see if the kids would really like it. And then we did a lot of sharing and resources at the end, talking about different resources and sharing a lot of different ideas, because I felt that was important based on the focus groups, that they really enjoyed that aspect. Now, the interesting thing about this, here we have some photos of some of the foods that we prepared, and they were smashing, you can see this lady smashing the graham crackers that the banana got rolled in. So you spread the banana half with peanut butter lightly, or some nut butter or sesame seed butter, sunflower seed butter, and then you roll it in the smashed graham crackers, and you can do that within the plastic bag so it stays pretty contained, as much as you can contain with a 2 to 3-year-old doing this type of activity. And then you would freeze the banana. It makes a great little snack. And then, so I'm going to pull some data. We had 2 questionnaires we had them do, and what you're going to see here is I need to tell you a little bit about the numbers, the demographics. Our goal was to pull participants from the focus groups to then participate in this presentation that I put together. And it was interesting because of the 17 English-speaking participants from the focus groups, I got 10 that were able to come and participate. So I had a fairly good number. I felt that we're still on the same page, if you will, of what we had done first and then what we were trying to do with the second part of it. But I struggled with the Spanish-speaking group. They didn't. I had 13 in the focus groups, and I think I only ended up with 1 that had participated in the focus group that came and participated in the presentation portion. And so we tried to then widen it to other Spanish-speaking providers who had not come to the focus group, that still were from that same list, from the original list that we worked from to get participants. And we were originally supposed to have 10, and 3 showed up. And then there was an issue with the translation, so what you're seeing in responses to the questionnaire are really just the 10 English-speaking. And we have just such small numbers, these wouldn't be statistically significant anyway. But I still thought it was interesting to take a look at how they responded. So the first set of questions is that I am sure I can discuss nutrition facts and information with parents. And in general, all 10 agreed or strongly agreed. And that I can positively influence what the 3 to 5-year-old children in my class eat. And again, all of them agreed or strongly agreed. The next set of questions, children who do not eat sweets or high-fat salty foods at school will be healthier than children who do eat such foods at school. And we have 7, the majority strongly agreed or agreed, but then we had 3 that neither agreed or disagreed. And then we get down to questions, children who eat vegetables and whole grain food items at school will be healthier than children who do not eat vegetables and whole grain food items at school. And we had agree, strongly agree, but then we have neither agree or disagree, and then we have two that just didn't even respond to that question. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And then we have the questions, children who are heavier than they should be, have more health risks than children who are normal weight. Majority agree, strongly agree, but then we have three that neither agree nor disagree. And what a child eats at home is more important than a child's diet and what they eat at school. And again, this is different than what the background information that I gave you in the beginning. So they were really divided on this question. And then children who are healthier now will be healthier as adults. And we have half agree or strongly agree, and then we have half that neither agree nor disagree. So they don't necessarily have that message, and that might be an area that we really need to focus on in the future. And then responses to a director's questionnaire. And if we look at, these are just some practices for foods at lunchtime and snack time, and this is for serving fresh or frozen fruit at lunchtime. So we have 3 that do every day, but the majority, 4 that do it 3 or 4 days. Fresh or frozen vegetable at lunch. We have 5 that do it every day. And then we have 4 that did it every day for snack for a vegetable. I was impressed to see those figures. This is just of 10, but hopefully it means, and I think this is consistent with the focus group where they kept talking about that message of fruits and veggies. So I think they have that fruit and veggie message. Certainly as a dietitian, I would like to see continue to build on that and continue to emphasize it, but I think it shows that that message is getting across to a certain extent. And then I really loved this one because when we asked about the whole grain type, the type of breads and rolls they serve, 9 of them said it's all 100% whole wheat or whole grain, or it says 100% whole grain on the label. And then for your cereals and types of crackers, all 10 said they use whole grain as the first ingredient. So I think that message is there. And then I asked, the director questionnaire covered breaded meats and processed meats, and we have 7 would still use the breaded meat. They still like their chicken nuggets. They know the kids like it. I think their perception is that they bake them in the oven, so they can't be as bad. I think there needs to be a little bit of education in that area because they set up and still use them 1 or 2 days a week. And then they still use the processed meats, the bacon and the hot dogs. Low-fat cheeses, we had 8 that used low-fat cheeses 1 or 2 days a week, and then we used, for regular cheese, you still see it used 3 of them every day, and 4 of them 1 or 2 days a week. And then we still have 1 that acknowledged they at least admitted it. They gave candy, chocolate, or ice cream every day. And then we have 2 that were 1 or 2 days a week, but then we have 7 that none serve. They just adamantly said they don't do it. And then the soda and sports drinks, this really was in line with what they talked about during the focus groups. They kept repeating over and over and over again, we don't do soda, we don't do sports drink, absolutely not. They get water, they get a little bit of juice. We do a lot of water. They kept saying it over and over again. It was consistent here. So the responses to the director questionnaire for physical activity, the amount of physical activity encouraged ranged from 15 to 30 minutes per day to over 60 minutes per day, active play. 9 of 10 providers reported using strategies to encourage active play. 8 of 10 providers reported that staff members never restrict active play for children who misbehave. 5 out of 10 providers reported just weekly television viewing, and 4 out of 10 reported weekly computer use. 2 of 10 providers reported daily use of each of those. 9 of 10 providers reported use of organized games and activities to build motor skills. 8 out of 10 reported incorporation of physical activity to everyday teaching games. All 10 reported use of small play equipment, and 8 out of 10 reported having outdoor climbing or playscape. So this is an interesting aspect here. This is one of the things that came out from the Spanish speaker in-home care providers. They talked about throughout, and both groups did this in their focus group, they talked about not having access or not knowing where there's good access to parks. That didn't even come up with the English-speaking care providers. They talked about utilizing their own yard or going on a nature walk, whereas the Spanish speakers were adamant about trying to find where there were parks that they could use and being frustrated and not having access to close parks or play spaces. So I wondered, it made me wish that I had asked, you always think of things you should have asked afterwards, and I wish I had asked a little more detail about their outdoor environment. I don't have that information. I think it would be something to examine locally when you put these presentations together, to really find out what they feel that they have access to. So if we take a look, go back, try to connect this back up to the Healthy Living Matters policies, there are several policy strategies that they are focusing on, and ones that specifically focus on child care providers are the education, looking at education and incentives for teachers and child care providers to be healthy role models, and then healthy schools and child care recognition programs. And if we take a look at what my findings show for this and implementation of these policies, I do think education and incentives would be effective. They really were very frustrated, less so for the English-speaking providers, but very much so for the Spanish-speaking providers. They were very frustrated that they were not receiving training credit when they participated in the presentation. We did not offer that. Hindsight, we probably should have, but it significantly impacted the attendance. I had 10 signed up, only 3 showed up, and then in speaking to them, it turns out that they had talked to the ones that did not come, and they said the general feeling was when they found out they weren't going to get any training credit, they just decided it wasn't worth their while to come. So I do think training credit or some type of incentive, and I think training credit would be the key thing to offer. And then a recognition program would merit further consideration. The providers were clearly proud of what they provide. I think they felt that they created a good home environment, a nice, caring environment. I think they felt that they were doing their job, and they provided healthy foods and activity, and they genuinely wanted these children to grow up to be healthy. And a recognition program would both reinforce their practices as well as boost their confidence that they are following good policy. I think one of the things that struck me that was very different from the center's work that I do, these caregivers make a true connection to the families that they care for. 2 of them had to leave early because they were attending the focus group, because they were going to attend the high school graduation of some children that they had cared for as babies. And they maintained contact with the family. They were invited to go to the child's high school graduation, and by golly, they were going to be there and go to the party afterwards. And I thought that was wonderful, because I don't think I've ever seen that at a child care center that I've done research in. So I think there's a true relationship that builds among these child care providers with the families, and you could definitely tell that some of them were caring for the children of the children that they had cared for. The next steps for Healthy Living Matters is they will be releasing the Community Action Plan on January 30th at the summit, and they'll be moving on to implementation of the policy strategies. And for more information for that, you can go to the Healthy Living Matters website. And the Community Action Plan, there are priorities that they are focusing on that do affect children. And as I said, some of these we pulled out that would affect more with just child care centers. Okay, and I do want to thank other team members that helped me with this. Maria Romo Palafox, she's a graduate student here at UT. She's also a registered dietitian. She's from Mexico, so she handled the focus groups and the presentation. And then Dr. Margaret Bradley, who I work with here at UT, and then with the UT School of Public Health, Courtney Bird-Williams and Srila Sharma both worked with me to present this, and then Susan Lackey, or Susan Parker, helped me set these up as well, were instrumental in helping me arrange all this material and the locations. Any questions? I'm sorry? Is there a question? I'm not hearing anything. I'm hearing an echo of my voice.
Can you hear me?
There, yes.
Hello, my name is Jenny, and I'm a health educator at Texas Children's Health Plan. My question was, since you had shown the statistics of the training in nutrition and physical activity that like a center child care worker would get versus the likelihood of an in-home child care worker would get, I guess my question is, what are the qualifications or what are there required trainings for the center child care workers, or is it just a lower requirement?
There are required, I don't know the actual specifics. I'm more versed in the center requirements, and there are training requirements that are necessary for both groups. However, they're not necessarily required going in depth with nutrition or physical activity. The modules are ones that they can choose or select from, whereas the family in-home providers, yes, I think what you see is if they are a CACFP provider, they have received definitely some nutrition education training to adhere to that program. If they're not, they haven't necessarily had to have, again, in-depth nutrition education, but they do have to maintain their training. They talked to me a little bit about this. They maintain their training about how to meet the rules and regulations and the licensing requirements. Their training doesn't really expand, and I think this opens a whole area to do more in-depth training on nutrition and physical activity.
I think so too. This is a great research study, and you gathered a lot of great information, and so I was just thinking, because you found out all this information, like even center child care workers could benefit from learning these things, since there's so many more kids who go to the center versus in-home.
Yes.
So, anyway.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for your question. Glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Nicola, did you have a question, Nicola? I'm looking at it looks like Nicola wanted to ask about the provider's participation in CACFP.
Yes, I did not ask that question on the demographic questionnaire, and I probably should have. I asked it informally at the presentation, and through the discussion at the focus groups for the Spanish speaking, it came up through the discussion. And so in general, what I would say is of the 13 participants from the Spanish-speaking care providers, the majority, if not all of them, participated in CACFP, whereas the 17 English-speaking, I would say only half of them participated in CACFP.
I had another question. This is Jenny again.
Yeah.
Did you say this was done in Harris County, or what was the location of focus groups?
These were all that took place in Harris County, down in Houston. The location of the focus groups were at UT School of Public Health.
Okay.
It's a centralized location.
In the Med Center?
No, actually in the UT School of Public Health building.
But yes, it is in the Med Center.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, because I was like, I drive by that. Okay, great. I was just curious.
You can tell I'm not from Houston. Okay.
That's okay. Thanks.
And it looks like Linda was going to ask if you were able to get a sense of technology that the providers may have access to from their homes, such as internet for training or access to other resources.
Well, I didn't ask that question specifically, but the fact that so many of them agreed. Okay, so many of them, especially in the Spanish-speaking group, essentially all 13 said that they wanted something online. So that indicates that they do have access to internet, whereas only I think either 6 or 8 of the 17 English-speaking providers indicated they wanted something online. But they all talked about using computers and their kids on computers, I think as part of the program that they provide. I think they all feel that they need to provide have some sort of computer games or something for preschool level program, I think, for their children. So my impression is that certainly they have access to technology. Whether they utilize it as much, obviously the Spanish-speaking group I think definitely does, and probably about half, at least half, if not more, of the English-speaking does. So I certainly think technology is a viable option to promote or to bring into play as you plan presentation or education. Any more questions?
Yes, can you show the, okay, never mind, I just got the message. I was going to ask about the community action plan, and just what that was used for.
Oh, yeah, the Community Action Plan is what Health Living Matters has developed.
Oh, okay.
And the different directions that they are going to promote or look at, maybe examining and developing policy on. And you can see down there at the very bottom, there were specific, we pulled out specific ones that would be focusing on child care.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, I just wanted to thank everyone for their time, and thank you to Dr. Schweitzer for this wonderful research and great presentation. We will make this webinar available on the Healthy Living Matters website, and that's healthylivingmatters.net. So if you have any other questions, please email me, Susan@healthylivingmatters.net, and if I need to, I can ask Dr. Schweitzer about more specifics and bring her into that conversation.
Absolutely.
But please, thank you for your time, and please let us know if you have any other questions. And everybody have a great weekend.